This is exactly why other Asians outside of California have such a problem and disdain for SoCal Asians. Because SoCal Asians, when they meet other Asians from like different states that are not from California, and this is just from personal experience, it's like we have to prove to these SoCal Asians that we're Asian.
If I meet Asians from these other random states, right?
Yeah.
Like, bro.
SoCal Asians are basically the East Asians of the United States. Now, that may be confusing to some, so let me explain. In history, East Asians have colonized Southeast Asia. Until this very day as well, East Asians have a superiority complex over Southeast Asians.
You know what Asian people are really racist against? Other Asians. Let me tell you something. Chinese Americans or Chinese Canadians who are born or grew up in Canada, US, they typically, I would say whitewashed. I don't know if that's the right word, but whatever you want to call it. Not all of them, but many of them are just extremely rude to, I would say, new incoming Chinese folks who are like maybe international students, but older. We essentially have an accent when you speak English.
When I moved to US, the biggest disappointment was racism. I was shocked. So many times white people, Latina, black people told me, go back to China. It was always unexpected, unpleasant, but honestly, somehow I didn't care. I didn't care. What really was painful for me, racism which came from Asian Americans, from Korean Americans, South Korean Americans, Chinese Americans.
As an Asian person, I'm gonna say this once. There are so many different types of Asians out there that there is not one single Asian that speaks for all of us. Because some of these Asians out here are making some fucking outlandish ass statements, thinking that they represent us when they really don't.
In the narrative of Asian America, one region has been cast and has cast itself as the main character. And in every story, the main character needs a supporting cast, often one they can look down upon to make their own role feel more significant.
If I meet Asians from these other random states, right?
Yeah.
Like, bro.
SoCal Asians are basically the East Asians of the United States. Now, that may be confusing to some, so let me explain. In history, East Asians have colonized Southeast Asia. Until this very day as well, East Asians have a superiority complex over Southeast Asians. I went to visit my home country, which is Vietnam, for the first time in 16 years. And I had a layover in Korea. Didn't think much of it. I was only there for like 4 hours. I went to a Shinsegae, which is a duty-free shop. Wanted to buy some skincare for my brother and I. We just love Korean skincare, Asian skincare. I mean, all Asians can relate on this. And I literally went up to the lady. She's like, oh, hello. And we were talking, and I told her what I wanted. And she's like, oh, are you Chinese? And I said, no, I'm Vietnamese. And she was like, oh, Vietnamese. And yeah, I looked pretty American. I wore color, for crying out loud. Apparently, at the freaking Korean airport, no one wears color. I literally had a green freaking sweater on, okay? It was a nice green cashmere sweater. But apparently that's, like, out of the norm for airport attire in Korea. I don't know. So I said, well, which, tell me if I freaking botched that, but that means what in Korean? Homegirl was shocked. But she was like, oh, let's just find this for you. And during my trip, there were so many Koreans visiting Vietnam, dressed up in tropical clothes, walking around with their families, which is like, yeah, so be it. But then also a lot of them treated the Vietnamese service workers so rudely. Like, it's just so insane. For a developed country in Korea, they're very set back and conservative, actually. And that is the same with SoCal Asians. Because here's the thing, a lot of these SoCal Asians, a lot of their parents immigrated to Southern California, okay? What they brought with them was conservative mindsets from their country back in whenever they left. That can also be said with Vietnamese Americans. Vietnamese Americans and Vietnamese people are actually so different. It's insane. So to think these people think that just because they're from Southern California that they're more Asian than other people is really hilarious, because in actual Asian countries right now, they're so much more progressive. Southeast Asia, by the way, they're more progressive than the freaking SoCal Asians think that they let on. SoCal Asians are honestly so whitewashed too, so I don't know where they're coming with this.
East Asians have a one-sided beef with the other parts of Asia. I think the two driving forces behind this are colorism and the fact that East Asia has more developed economically than these other parts of Asia. But when they carry this over to the West especially, it makes no sense. East Asians are in the same category on the census with everybody else from the same continent. Actually, Pacific Islanders are grouped in there with us too. A lot of East Asians will disparagingly refer to Asians from warmer parts of the continent using the word jungle as if to mean primitive when they're not. East Asia wouldn't have developed the way that it did throughout history if not for inter-exchange between our part of Asia and everybody else. I think in the West, a lot of it comes because East Asians can achieve greater proximity to whiteness than, for example, Southeast Asians who come from less developed countries most of the time that have been war-torn by Western powers and who have darker skin. And in the last few years, it feels like racism towards South Asians has gotten extremely off the rails, not just from East Asians, but from everybody. Like, it's just okay to call them ugly or to say that their food is not sanitary when both of those things are not true. And in case some of you are really not getting it, there is a massive Chinese diaspora through all of Southeast Asia. Like, we went to every corner of that region, immigrating to trade and look for a better life. And now those Chinese people have been integrated into Southeast Asian society, but they are still Chinese. Are we gonna look down on them now too? And as for South Asia, a lot of them actually look kind of like us. Look at Nepalese people. Many of them look like us. And in Northeast India, also a lot of them look like us. But they are very South Asian. And this division within the Asian American community isn't helping us. Light-skinned East Asians might be the most white adjacent among us, but when other Asians are feeling the pain, we are feeling it too. So get your shit together and stop being weird.
To understand the dynamic, you have to understand the origin story Southern California wrote for Asian America. SoCal, particularly LA and Orange County, didn't just have Asian immigrants. It had the critical mass, wealth, and media machinery to create the first widely disseminated pop culture version of Asian American life. This wasn't just about community, it was about branding. They were the first to be visibly cool in the mainstream American gaze, linked to car culture, beach life, and entertainment. This created a powerful and often unspoken hierarchy, the SoCal Asian as the default, authentic, aspirational archetype, and everyone else as a variation, an off-brand, or worse, a throwback. I remember visiting cousins from the Midwest who would anxiously ask if their clothes were SoCal enough, as if their own Asian-ness was being auditioned. This pop cultural dominance fostered a main character mentality. When you believe your experience is the most visible and validated, it's easy to view other Asian American narratives, from the Hmong communities in Minnesota to the enclaves in Texas, as peripheral, less evolved, or simply irrelevant to the real story.
I have been waiting for someone to say that they don't like Asian friend groups, because here's my 2 cents about how I feel about Asian friend groups. I don't know why, but they're seriously one of the most racist and colorist people you will ever meet, ever. Like, you're Asian and you're hating on other Asian people. For why? Literally for why? You're not better than anyone, regardless of your ethnicity. Also, not everybody goes to raves or plays Valorant or likes boba. And, like, if you don't do any of those things, like, they think you're not Asian enough, which is so stupid, because it's like, not everybody does that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you do it, cool, but it just seems like a lot of these Asian friend groups, that's literally all they do, and then they low-key be talking shit on people who don't do that kind of stuff. Like, what? I just like to stay home. Also, why are they always dating each other? Like, they're always dating within their circle, or they like each other, and it's just, I think that's kind of weird. I mean, I guess it kind of goes with, like, other friend groups too, but knowing Asian people, they just love to start shit for no reason. Low-key be getting it from their ancestors or some shit, or like their aunties and moms, because, you know, they be gossiping and they love the drama.
Like, at the end of the day, I am proud of being Asian, but it's just these Asian friend groups are toxic as hell, and I highly recommend you stay away from them, to be very honest. But I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be friends with, your ethnicity, or the same race as you. I have nothing against that. It's just a lot of these Asian friend groups are pieces of trash and are rude for no reason.
This is exactly why other Asians outside of California have such a problem and disdain for SoCal Asians. Because SoCal Asians, when they meet other Asians from like different states that are not from California, and this is just from personal experience, it's like we have to prove to these SoCal Asians that we're Asian. I'm from the Midwest. I grew up in Nebraska and Iowa. So when I tell other Asian people that, especially SoCal Asians, the look on their faces and the dumb questions that come out of their mouth, the look on their faces and the many conversations that I've had with SoCal Asians, it's just like they do have a superiority complex. And unfortunately, that's exactly why other Asian people talk shit about SoCal Asians, because y'all put yourselves in this position with these nasty attitudes towards other Asians. And this video is like a great example of their attitude towards other Asian people. And I don't really know what he was trying to do saying that, because to me, that was an asshole comment. At your big age and at my big age, we're in a time where we can finally be proud of our culture, and we can finally talk about our culture and our upbringing and being Asian in a way that doesn't make us feel less than. Okay, if that, I think you know where I'm going. And having this attitude is the reason why a lot of SoCal Asians are not well liked with other Asians. And I get it. Y'all grew up with access to Asian things that a lot of other Asians are unable to experience or were unable to experience. But that doesn't mean you can throw it in our faces.
This hierarchy is enforced through a brutal system of lateral policing. The rudeness or meanness is not random. It's a tool for maintaining social borders. The most common weapons are 1. Linguistic policing, mocking accents or language fluency to separate the assimilated from the fresh off the boat. 2. Geographic elitism, the belief that a 926XX, Irvine, or 900XX, LA, zip code confers a more legitimate Asian American identity than one from, say, Oklahoma or Georgia. 3. Cultural gatekeeping, dismissing other Asian groups' foods, traditions, or social norms as weird or backwards compared to their own. This isn't just bullying. It's lateral racism, the internalization of white supremacist logic applied within the community. By othering Asians who are too Asian, the SoCal archetype proves its own proximity to whiteness and American cool. I witnessed this at a large Pan-Asian event where a group loudly made fun of another group's traditional dress, performing their own assimilation for an invisible, approving audience. The cruelty is a performance of belonging. It shouts, "I am not one of them. My place is closer to the center."
Is it just me, or do I sometimes wish that I was like a SoCal Asian? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm an East Coast Asian, so I really don't have it like as bad as like Midwest or like Southern Asians. But there's just something about like SoCal Asians or like West Coast Asians that are just so confident, and I think, yeah, in some ways they're pretentious, but in other ways it's like, imagine growing up feeling like you're a racial majority, like as an Asian American. Like, hell, I'd be confident too. I'd be so pretentious too. Because it's like, it's having pride in who you are and your identity. Despite that, I will say I'm extremely grateful for the way that I grew up and like the region that I grew up in. Because like, yes, I know what it feels like to be a minority, and I can appreciate that. I definitely think I'm a lot more empathetic towards a lot of political issues, and I do think that I'm a lot more empathetic towards a lot of other racial groups as well, and I think that is something that is very important, especially because I don't think solidarity is something that is seen very commonly amongst Asian Americans. I'm doing a research project right now, essentially on like the Asian model minority myth and how that in itself is anti-Black and affects systematic racism against Black people. I know it's a very broad topic. I'm trying to narrow it down, maybe to something like affirmative action or something like that. But I do think it should be said that, like, a lot of Asian Americans, especially people on the West Coast, cannot sympathize or empathize with a lot of other racial minority groups because they don't know what it feels like. And I think that in itself is just a humongous privilege and is why a lot of Asian Americans on the West Coast come off as pretentious. Because they don't realize the scope of everything else that happens to other racial minority groups and other Asian Americans all across the United States, all across, like, North America. But all in all, I think it's extremely important for Asian Americans all across the states to feel solidarity and to be there for one another. And I also do think it's important to take pride in who you are, take pride in your culture, take pride in your appearance, take pride in what your parents have given you. Like, take that and run with it. Don't be ashamed. Don't feel small. Don't feel little. Don't feel like you're an outcast, because you're not.
When I moved to US, the biggest disappointment was racism. I was shocked. So many times white people, Latina, black people told me, go back to China. It was always unexpected, unpleasant, but honestly, somehow I didn't care. What really was painful for me, racism which came from Asian Americans, from Korean Americans, South Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, never from Japanese Americans, never, or other Asians. They told me, you look like Asian. I said, yes, I like, I am Asian. They laughed. Ha 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 ha, no. You are not Asian. You are not real Asian. Actually, I am very confident, but I don't know why it was so painful for me. I didn't choose my race. It wasn't my decision, but I'm proud to be Asian. Very proud. Race is not about culture or history. Race is about anthropology and biology. If someone does believe that I should get some permission or approval from them to have right to feel myself Asian, I would like to say to all of them,
but why the need to be so mean? Why the desperate maintenance of this hierarchy? The answer is often profound insecurity. The SoCal Asian archetype is built on a precarious foundation, conditional acceptance. Its cool is often borrowed from Black and Latino street culture. Its wealth is often new, a single generation removed from struggle. Its status is dependent on a pop culture machine that is famously fickle. This creates a fortress mentality. The rudeness is a defense mechanism. If the main character narrative collapses, if other Asian American stories from Atlanta, Houston, or Detroit gain equal cultural weight and redefine what it means to be Asian in America, then the SoCal identity loses its special status. The bullying is a preemptive strike against this dilution. It's the frantic gatekeeping of a community that deep down knows its premier position is not guaranteed, but leased from a mainstream America that has never fully loved it. The main character syndrome is, at its core, the anxiety of the supporting actor who knows the spotlight can be taken away at any moment.
You know what Asian people are really racist against? Other Asians. Let me tell you something. Chinese Americans or Chinese Canadians who are born or grew up in Canada, US, they typically I would say whitewashed. I don't know if that's the right word, but whatever you want to call it. Not all of them, but many of them are just extremely rude to, I would say, new incoming Chinese folks who are like maybe international students, a bit older. We essentially have an accent when you speak English. I remember this because I was talking to a couple people. They were all international students, and they were just really, nice folks. And they're not like you're super rich, whatever, international student, but they got a good life. That's how they're able to move here and pay expensive school and stuff like that. But I remember them telling me their terrible experience just anywhere they go with specifically like Asian Americans, specifically like Chinese Americans. I remember they were saying like they would go to Aritzia, which is like, a clothing store for mostly women's clothing. And they always have, typically, like, I don't know why, but I guess maybe because it's in Toronto, there's like a Chinese Asian girl working there. And she would always be, and there's a couple of them, they will always be so rude, so racist, essentially, to all these Chinese international students. There's just like this jealousy. They're like, oh, you speak English? They're just like extremely rude, right? Anyways, just want to share this because I feel like so much hate, right? So much jealousy. We don't need to do that. I wish this video goes to some of the folks and hopefully spread a message where you don't need to do that. Not everyone is blessed, and I think it's important to understand each other more than ever, especially in times like this.
I get East Asians in my comments saying, oh, but we're both Asian, or why are you hating on another Asian?
I don't want to overstep, so please let me know if I am, and I'll delete the video. I'm just talking from my own personal experience. Obviously, I'm not Asian, but, well, one time I got confused as a Asian Filipino in elementary school one time, and I was, like, really excited. But anyways, so I grew up in Northern Virginia, specifically Springfield. I grew up all over Northern Virginia, but Springfield most of my life, right? And I don't know if you know about Springfield, but Springfield is comprised majority, well, there's West Springfield, which is like rich people. We'll talk about that after. But the Springfield that I grew up, like lower income, and it's made up a lot of like immigrant families, a lot of Latin American, African, and Asian, right? And the neighborhoods that I grew up specifically, there's a lot of Vietnamese, Filipino, and Pakistani immigrant families, right? And that's who I really grew up most going to like school with, right? So along with those groups, also like Ghanaians, Somalis, and Ethiopians, we all went to like the same kind of elementary schools, right? When we mixed in with like the other like schools for like middle school and high school, that's when you realize just how I didn't know that there was that much beef between Asians, right? And it kind of translated into beef with us, and I was like, whoa. Again, I don't want to overstep. I just want to talk about my own experience. But like usually you would see a lot of like East Asian students, right? And I don't want to single out like a single ethnicity between them. I'm just gonna say East Asian students. The way that they would call like Latinos, Filipinos as an insult. I remember there was this one boy who he was like, oh, like you're really tan. And I was like, bitch, we are the same color. And he was like, oh, but it's different. It doesn't matter if our parents are from different continents. Me and you are the same color. IB and AP classes clearly don't make people smarter. That's all I'm going to say about that. And I would hear comments about Vietnamese people and Filipinos and Pakistanis hanging out with the Mexicans. There's no Mexicans in Northern Virginia. Like, barely any. Like, are you even trying to get the ethnicity correct? And also something that I know would piss off like the Pakistani students is like East Asians would call them Indians. And I was like, there's like 3 Indians in our entire school. And this whole separation of East Asians and Southeast Asians, it's institutional too, because in elementary school and like ESOL or whatever, like the kids who spoke Japanese, Korean, and Mandarin, they would be put in one ESOL class, right? I'm not kidding you when I tell you they would put the Vietnamese and Filipino kids in the Spanish-speaking kids' ESOL classes. We would literally be looking at each other like, we didn't understand each other. Filipino kids, we could understand them kind of. Like, not really, but like more or less. When we had to talk to the Vietnamese kids, because they would make us talk to each other. We literally didn't know. They would like try and force us to speak English. It would literally be like, hola, xin chao. That's why when I see discourse like that video, I'm just like, oh my God, I was a witness to this when I was watching Playhouse Disney. I don't know if it was yours, but that was my experience growing up.
As an Asian person, I'm going to say this once. There are so many different types of Asians out there that there is not one single Asian that speaks for all of us. Because some of these Asians out here are making some fucking outlandish ass statements, thinking that they represent us when they really don't. So if you're an Asian person and you feel like you have some type of value to add and contribute to the world, please make content. Because I feel like nowadays, we really don't have the best representation for us. Like a lot of the Asians out there that have a lot of followers, not all of them, but some of them, a lot of them are just making us look bad. So to all my Asian brothers and sisters, please start making content.
A community that defines itself by looking down on its own reflections is a community building a house of mirrors, not a home. So here's the challenge. Kill your main character. The next time you feel that cringe, that judgment, that urge to police another Asian person's authenticity based on their accent, zip code, or cultural practice, stop. Ask yourself, who am I performing for? What fragile part of my own identity am I trying to protect by putting theirs down? Real cultural power doesn't come from being the only star in a small, walled-off sky. It comes from being part of a constellation, a vast, diverse, and interconnected network where every point of light makes the whole picture brighter, stronger, and impossible to ignore. Your story is not the only one that matters. It's time to read the other chapters.